Okay, we're on. All right, so last time we were just finishing up with chapter 6, and just a little bit of review because we did speak about interview schedules and questionnaires. So very briefly, what are interview schedules or what are questionnaires, right? So it's just a series of questions that you have that help you answer your research question or research method. It's a bunch of questions. Let's get this working. Let's choose a different color for today just for fun. Okay. Organized questions in a sequence in order to understand a certain phenomenon. Okay. Charlotte has entered. Let's go. Perfect. Good. Okay. So when you create your interview schedules or questions, one of the things we spoke about is keeping the questions relevant. So each question really must be relevant to what the goal is. It has to be relevant to what your research objective is. You can't just ask questions for fun. If this is an interview you're having on how do you feel about downsizing and moving into a smaller apartment, if the questions are all to do with downsizing and what kind of older adults you think would downsize, what they think about downsizing, there's no need to ask, well, how often a week do you meet your friends? Not directly relevant. So each of your questions has to be well thought out so that the data you get is relevant. And it's the same idea, no fishing, which means you don't ask questions just for the heck of it. They have to be organized to answering the research objective. Oh, did somebody do that? Because I didn't. Sorry? It's a ghost. We have Gremlin in the works. For those of you who don't know Gremlin, it's a movie from the 80s where there are these weird, cute, furry creatures who turn into monsters when, I don't know how they turn into monsters. I forget that part. Anyway, so basically no fishing experiments, so you don't ask questions just for fun. Anytime you prepare an interview schedule, you plan. Always plan your research questions, prepare your questions, and test run them with a friend or a bunch of friends. And ask yourself always, ask about each question. What does this question measure? Are we getting something out of this question? Because every question should be measuring something. If you're talking about, like, we chose the example of downsizing. So a relevant question is, how do you feel about your retirement income? Because obviously, you can think about it logically. Good morning. If individuals don't have sufficient retirement income, they might be downsizing to use the equity in their house to supplement their income. So that's a relevant question. What may not be a relevant question to downsizing, maybe, well, let's think of an example that would not be relevant to downsizing. Do you cook for yourself? While that might be of great interest to you, knowing more about the older adult, it has nothing to do with the actual question of factors that influence downsizing, right? So you have to be very careful as to what the question measures. There are several challenges with interview schedules and questionnaires, and we went through those challenges, asking impossible questions. Example, have you stopped molesting children? I mean, impossible question, no way to answer that properly. It's insulting as well. Or asking stuff like, in your culture, do people do A, B, or C? There are several challenges. So with interview schedules and questionnaires, you have to be careful to go through the checklist that's there in your textbook, which actually tells you what questions, what kind of questions you should have. The other challenge with interview schedules, you may have a perfect interview schedule. You may have practiced it with a bunch of people, but it might be too long. You may have 100 questions in that. Who has that kind of time to sit and fill that out? So there's a recommendation if you're a student. Keep it less than 25. In fact, your textbook probably suggests 15 or less. I can't remember, but definitely less than 25. Okay, you can look in a textbook. You can keep the number of items limited, keep them relevant. And where do you get your 15 items from? You get them from a pool of questions. And the reason you get a pool of questions, and then of course I'm going to ask you where you get the pool from, right? Okay. The reason you have a pool is and especially if you mix them up and they're still measuring the same variable. So if you have a bunch of questions based on, let's say you're measuring attitudes towards closer economic ties or closer, more trade ties with Donald Trump's USA. And how do Canadians feel about that, right? You can have 100 different questions that measure different aspects of how people feel regarding closer ties in terms of economy with the US. But you may only be asking 25, but each time you ask 25, there could be a slightly different set which still measures the entire spectrum, okay? And the reason you may pick different 25 out of the 100 each time is you may choose a different set based on who you're talking to. Okay, there might be different things you might figure out are of interest to one type of person versus another. Where do you get your pool of questions that you can make up questions, but ideally you may want to use a pool that exists. And where would you get that information from? Hi, Aretha.
Hello, Professor. Sorry about that. Quick washroom break.
No, that's all good. So you get from previous research work that people have done. They may not have done the same kind of research that you're doing, but they might have researched similar aspects. So there are question pools available that if you're a smart researcher, you'll make use of existing question pools to frame your questions because those are tried and tested. Okay. Sometimes you don't have the luxury of doing that. You're studying something very unique. So as a young researcher, you want to study the phenomenon of hoarding in Sudbury. Hoarding is a big problem. Lots of older adults hoard, and there's some older adults' homes are absolute fire hazards because they have floor-to-ceiling newspapers from the 50s, right? And they're all yellowed out. They are, a little electrical spark somewhere, and everything's gone, right? So you're very interested in studying hoarding, and obviously you can't ask an older adult, "Are you hoarding?" Right? So the way to work around it, do you like to, the questions have to be sensitive to, they have to measure different things, but they also have to address the fundamental question, well, why do older adults in the city of Greater Sudbury hoard stuff? And hoarding is mostly with stuff. Typically, a lot of stuff doesn't have value, but sometimes you'll see people's yards with like 14 cars. Why anybody needs 14 cars when only one works, I don't know, but it occurs. And there's always a plan to fix it at some point, but that never occurs. So it's just there.
Some of the hoarding, some people would explain that it's holding on to the past, or it's a memory, it's a tangible memory, a time, a 1960s Bluebird, I'm just saying, or, furniture from an era that was handed down, handed down, handed down. pictures, newspaper articles, because they don't think journalism is today as, I don't know, genuine as it was in the past, or they always have a reason, lots of reasons.
It's well, thank you for that, Aretha. So there's some insight. Aretha's gotten a lot of input about hoarding, which is a good thing. Um, the human mind always tries to find an explanation, right, to act upon,
Yeah.
and that's the fundamental idea. That's chapter one. So, and humans are very smart. They'll decide what they want to do first and then find reasons afterwards for doing it. It's called rationalization. So the older adult who's hoarding has decided they want that piece. And then they start attaching different things to it. Well, this was given to me by such and such person. These are ties to the 60s. This was the greatest time of my life. And they're all legitimate. They're not wrong. But the decision to hoard has occurred before attaching all of these ties. But that's just the human mind. We rationalize, right? Scientists ideally should give the answer before rationalize, and they should rationalize first and then come to the answer. But lawyers do the other way. They decide the answer and then rationalize. There's a difference between lawyers and scientists. Anyway, off topic. Let's get back on task. Okay, so let's clear this. All right. Okay, quick review. Rules for questionnaires: clarify the question, test run it, be direct, ask a simple question. A follow-up is absolutely fine. How do you perceive your life following retirement, and how has your life course helped shape your perception? Too complex. We did this last time. We spoke about face sheets, which are stuff that gathers basic information. We spoke about questions must have factual answers. There's no point in asking a complex question which they can't answer. How many times were you at the hospital is a simple question. Direct questions to the correct party. So again, how much does a person work? Don't direct it to the employer. Questions have to be inoffensive, avoid abbreviations and titles. Don't ask multiple issues in one question. Don't use colorful language. Sugar, white sugar equals white death. What do you think? No, don't do that. Impossible situation, and check questions for assumptions. And we had an example of assumption last time. What does your dad do? You know, those kinds of things. We spoke about attitudinal survey. You can measure different attitude. You can measure ageism, sexism. And for example, if you're measuring ageism and you have a hypothesis that young people growing up with grandparents that played a positive role are less ageist than young people who had no grandparents or who were estranged from them. So in a question like this, one of the exercises we could do here is ask, what are the concepts? What are the concepts here? So one concept is ageism, right?
Yeah.
What's the other concept? Because you're saying ageism is related to something. So that's
Sexism.
one box. No, in the same hypothesis.
Oh. The younger generation? No.
What are you saying? Ageism is related to what?
People's attitudes, their perception.
That itself is ageism, right? Their attitude and perception is what causes ageism. But what we're saying is ageism is related to positive grandparenting or negatively related to positive grandparenting. So basically what we're saying is if you had a positive experience with your grandparents growing up, you're less likely to be ageist, right? So your two concepts are ageism and positive grandparenting. Those are the two concepts. What is the independent variable?
The grandparents.
Yes, wonderful. Thank you, Charlotte. Positive grandparenting. Grandparenting. Let's remove positive for now. Because we're going to ask questions both ways. What is a dependent variable? Ageism, right? Because we're saying positive grandparenting let's say grandparenting has occurred in a bunch of different cases. Sometimes it's been positive, sometimes it's been negative. Negative could mean an absence of grandparents too, right? So you have a whole spectrum of grandparenting with different association of children with the grandparent. And what we're saying depends on the quality of grandparenting is the ageist attitude, right? And that's why it's easy to identify what's dependent and what's independent. Okay. And again, you could go ahead and prepare an attitudinal measure. Again, we asked, it's impossible to ask a person if you're ageist. Nobody's going to answer that properly. How do you measure it? You use a scale like we measured the attitudinal scales. So when you pick questions that represent attitudes, it can be like, can we make up 5 questions as a class? How do we measure? And because the answers are all going to be strongly disagree, disagree, neutral, agree, and strongly agree. So think of a question. Let's think of 5 questions.
Do you work well with older coworkers?
Oh, everyone's going to say yes to that. You can't
Okay.
ask that.
Okay.
You're measuring an attitude.
Okay.
Okay, I'll give you an example. I'll start, and then you guys can chime in. When I say guys, it's not supposed to be gendered. I just say guys to everybody. I know all of you are women here, so anyway. So I'll start with the first one. Adults should not have to do computer work. Or
what about older adults can contribute positively to the workforce?
Older adults contribute positively towards the workforce?
Yeah, or can contribute positively towards the workforce.
So if you tell, I was going to say older adults should work in minimum tech environments, should work in low tech environments, can contribute positively to the workforce. Remember your questions, if they give away what you're trying to ask, people can avoid answering truthfully. And by truthfully, it means true to themselves. So if you say older adults are great to work with, and if they kind of get a sense for what you're measuring, they're all going to say, yeah, sure, right? But if you pick things, if you want to actually measure bias, you have to say things like, older adults find it very challenging to adapt to new technology, right? That's what will actually pick out their attitude. Because I see just as many older adults as much as younger adults who struggle with a lot of new things that come up. So we have to frame them. You can give away a few questions, but the most of your what else? So we have 3. We need 2 more. Anybody in class, live or remotely? Make something up. What would tell you they're ageist?
Older adults take time off. I want to say like they take more sick leave, or I want to allude to the fact that they tend to be more sickly. I don't know how to say it.
Oh, so okay. Let's try framing it differently.
Yeah.
for a fast-paced environment, older adults are not the perfect choice as they need to take a lot of sick leave.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because that's an assumption we make, but that's not necessarily true.
No, but that's the thing. So older adults are a poor choice for a fast-paced environment as they often get sick. You see how this question, even though it sounds innocuous and it sounds like what people might expect, is completely ageist. You see how that works? And those are the kinds of questions you want in your survey. And I know I'm throwing a challenge at you, and none of you have done this before. But this is fun to think about how these questions are supposed to work. Okay, one more, last one. Older adults should make a higher contribution to their health insurance premiums because they are most likely to use it.
Biased.
Does that make sense? Oops. Now, one of the things we didn't do is we did not reverse the scales. They're all strongly disagree to agree, right? Because as long if you strongly agreed with everything, you're horribly ageist, and if you strongly disagree with everything, you're not. Now, if you wanted to switch a scale, if you wanted to switch a question around, you could easily switch, let's say, question 4, and you can say older adults are a good choice even in a fast-paced environment. Older adults are just as good as anybody else in a fast-paced environment. Or older adults, how do we switch this? Older adults are on equal footing with younger adults in a fast-paced environment in terms of both physical and mental abilities. And then you can, I don't know how we'd switch the scale. Well, we'll have to think about this a little bit. So it's good to have a switch scale. So when people are reading it and they're going through what instinctively comes to them, they don't just pick all strongly disagree, and then they go, hey, here you go, I got a good score, I'm not ageist. But you don't tell people what you're measuring either. I mean, that's a giveaway. Then they start overthinking, and then you get fake answers. Likert scale is something like this: your strongly agree, disagree types. You can convert your Likert scale into numerical responses. So you strongly disagree could be, I don't know, a 1. A disagree could be a 2. Neutral could be a 3, 4, and 5. Or you could have 0, -1, -2. +1 and +2. It depends on how you set it up. There are many ways to do this, but the key to understand is attitudes are often measured using an attitude questionnaire and using a Likert scale. Okay, anybody questions? I know we did this last time, just a little more detail in the review, because I think this is important. I'm going to have questions on this chapter, probably more than others. Yeah, so how do you get questions? Well, you try to use existing questions. How many questions? We spoke about that. You don't want too many, between 15 and 25. How many issues? You can use the same questionnaire to check, well, how many people are both ageist and sexist? It's up to the researcher. Ideally, you want to just pick one issue at a time. Okay, figure out what's your dependent, what's your independent variable. There are different kinds of scales, and the textbook will talk about them. So you have the Likert scale, right, which does your strongly disagree to strongly agree. And then you have ranking scales. So for example, your ranking scales tell you, well, We're looking at university education. Let's say we're interviewing high school students for university education. So you give them 5 choices. Closeness to home, expenses, profile of the university, employment opportunity, what else should we say? Quality of professors. So, and you have like a bunch of questions which have 5 choices, and you tell each of the students, well, please rank them in your own way to prioritize. So one student may pick expenses are most important, closeness to home not as much, so that becomes 5. Profile of the university is kind of important, not such a big deal. Employment is super important, so that comes next. And then quality of prof, I'm pretty smart, I can do with any prof, okay? So people rank each set of questions with multiple choices differently. And that's a different way of getting information as well, because it tells you how people prioritize what they want. Again, when they rank stuff, you can still assign a numerical value to it, but it's a little bit different from a Likert scale. They both end up giving you slightly different types of information. A ranking tells you not just what's important for each variable being measured, but how important it is when given a list of things.
Like in terms of their priority.
Exactly. So, if I'm the student recruiter at Laurentian, priority, getting a Likert scale is great to understand what students' attitudes are towards enrolling in Laurentian, and I have a sense for it. But what's even better is ranking. So if I know that for a lot of students that are considering Laurentian, one of the reasons they're considering it is because it's, the criteria to get in is not as stringent. Okay, if that's a priority, then I'm going to look at that, go, okay, students see that as a positive thing, and there are many students coming in, and it's not hyper competitive. Maybe this is what we sell. Maybe this is what we talk about. Maybe this is what we advertise, saying we are not restrictive. Obviously, you don't want to say we suck, so we take everybody. You want to say that we're less restrictive and we're more open to different enrollment and all of those things. So, there's a benefit to having scales of that sort. So these are all pages in your textbook where I've just provided references so you can go back and take a look. But when you examine records and publication, you can look at statistics that you can find, you can look at content, and we spoke about male and female protagonists and storybooks for children. The rules for content analysis are pretty much the same. Okay, now let's get back to the questions in the chapter, because I think we got interrupted, or I stopped that because I realized we hadn't covered a couple of sections up. I'm still here. Okay, there we go. So what we have on this page, I believe this is page 117. When you do content analysis, there's something called a data summation sheet. So if you're comparing articles between 1945 and 2018, and you're basically saying, well, as more women got into the workforce, there were more articles geared towards women, recognizing that they had now had purchasing potential. They are more likely to spend money to buy magazines that have that content. So when you look at 1945, you look at how many pages you analyze, you put a number here, and then how many pages you did in 2018. And then you start counting how many pages were devoted to employed married women, and you go 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever it is. Let's say you end up with, we're just making this up, Okay. Proportion of pages. So your proportion might be 0.5%, and this might be 25%. Total number of articles, and so we're just making up numbers. So it could, whatever the number is, you just. So this is how you'd have a data summation sheet when you do data analysis. Okay. We've spoken about validity before. A validity of any variable is its ability to reflect the concept accurately. Okay. So for example, you can have many variables to represent a concept. Health can be represented by, some would say, absence of illness, some would say ability to fulfill all of your all of the potential for yourself, your mental, your spiritual, your physical, all of those faculties are enriched, and you're well, and you're feeling happy. So it's a complex concept, and there are different variables themselves. It's hard to find a variable that, while being valid, also represents the concept completely. Okay, but at least it represents it sufficiently that it can be taken as a measure. For example, length is a valid measure of growth for an infant, but you can't measure an infant's growth by length alone. You have to have length, you have to have weight, you have to have circumference of the head, you have to have developmental milestones, you have to have all of these different things to actually say, when you go to a physician, they don't just measure the baby's length. They do a whole bunch of measurements before they tell you your baby is doing well, right? They don't just do, or you take your puppy to the vet, same thing. Your dog's doing well. They don't just go do one thing, put the dog on the scale. Yep, fine, you can go, right? That's the same thing. Reliability is a little bit different. Reliability is the idea that no matter how many times you do it, you get the same result. And reliability also speaks to the fact that no matter who makes the measurement, it's always going to be the same. We've done examples of reliability. No matter who measures the length of, I don't know, this classroom that we're in, length and breadth, as long as they have a tape measure, they're going to get round about the same numbers. It's not going to change. If you use the same tape measure, you have 100 people measured, you're going to get the same exact number. So it's a reliable form of measure. The benefit of obviously content analysis, especially if you use recorded data which has transcripts, or you're looking at documents, is when you're looking for content and themes, what you will consistently find is no matter who goes through them, they're going to find the same themes that you found. Okay, it's hard to find. So that means your work has been reliable, your method of documenting the themes has been reliable. Okay, let's go back to the questions. Yeah, we did this already. We don't have to worry about that. Okay, I think we answered what it means to reverse the polarity of response for an item. We do that typically in attitudinal scales. Okay. What are the steps involved in preparing to do the research involved when you do content analysis? Again, this is in your textbook. We're not going to cover it all over again. There are a bunch of steps. You focus, you narrow your question, you decide what is the content you're going to look at, you have your data collection sheets, and you decide what you're going to look for as themes. For example, if you're looking for articles dedicated to the difference in content appealing to employed married women from the 1940s to now, well, that's what you're looking for. You're counting the number of pages, counting the number of articles, so on. What is the problem of validity? When they ask a question like this, if you get a question like this, what is the problem of validity? I'll obviously, if I will be making your question paper, so I will not ask you this way, but what they're basically asking you is, what do you understand by validity? Okay, what is the problem of reliability? Well, what do you mean by reliability? And you're talking essentially about variables. When is a variable considered reliable? When is a variable considered valid? That's what you have to answer. So in this chapter, one of the examples they provide is the frequency of sexual activity each month. Suggests or as a measure of closeness between partners in a couple, and the number of incidents of infidelity an indication of marital satisfaction. Are these valid measures of the concept? So the concept is marital satisfaction. And the two measures that they've suggested, one measure they've suggested is amount of cheating, and the second they've suggested is number of What's your opinion? Do you think these are valid measurements of marital satisfaction? I have a few browed furrows in class for those who can't see, but are they reliable measures? Can someone be, so the question is, if...
Yeah, they're reliable. You can count how many times they may have been cheating, and you can pretty much count how much intimate contact they've had, say per week, per fortnight, per month. So
Aretha, great answer. Absolutely reliable, 100% reliable. So the answer is they're 100% reliable. But are they valid? That's another question. That's a different question. So like Aretha said, if they were to honestly answer a survey regarding how many times they cheated on their spouse or how many times they had sex a particular month, regardless of how many times they answer a survey, if they were being completely honest, they probably will not change that number, okay? But is it accurately measuring marital satisfaction?
no.
Okay, and that's the thing. So it's a reliable measure, but it's not a valid measure. Okay, so it's another example to think of how there are many ways to think about reliability and validity and how they're different. People assume reliability and validity are the same. No, my watch is reliable because it's consistently 5 minutes late. It's slow. It doesn't work. It's reliable, but it's always 5 minutes slow. It's not at all valid because the time is always wrong. See what I'm saying?
And to base, for example, these two variables on satisfaction in a marriage, there's more, there's financial concerns, there is family time, there's more to make it valid.
Yeah, as arguments. And there are many relationships where one spouse will look the other way because they're otherwise very happy with their marriage. Okay, yeah. And while that might be, it's not very common, it does happen in a lot of situations. All right. Explain how reliability is understood by quantitative and qualitative researchers. Are their understandings the same or different? So first question, how do quantitative and qualitative researchers understand reliability differently? What do you think? For those of you who've read the chapter, this is your time. Chime in and educate everybody. Or feel free to open your textbook and tell me. I'm open to all options. Okay, let's break the question down. This is the example of having two issues in one question. What do quantitative researchers want in reliability?
They want the thing to be fixed. It doesn't change for that
So,
period.
okay, yes, you're right, Aretha, but can we use words such as instrument of measure, units, and variable? Let's put these three words together in one sentence and answer that part.
Quantitative researcher needs the variable to be consistent. Their instrument of measure could be whether it's degrees, frequency, kilos. They need it.
So your instrument is your thermometer or your ruler or your tape, right? So for quantitative scientists, when using the same instrument of measure and the same measurable units, if the quantities are consistently reproducible, that's considered reliable for a quantitative scientist, right?
Yes.
Now, if you're qualitative, what does reliability mean?
For a qualitative researcher, their instrument of measure may be more person-oriented, like if certain conditions in the marriages are met, would that produce overall satisfaction? And the variables that they may look at may be not numeric per se, but like quality of time, managing resources, things that bring about satisfaction. So their variable may not be as rigid like thermometer or kilograms. It's more toward the quality of life.
The question is, what would if five qualitative researchers tried to understand, they're all working separately, they tried to understand a certain problem and they're looking at a bunch of variables. At what point would all of them agree that, well, this variable is a reliable measure?
The more frequently a variable comes up in their research, in their evaluation, are the more common themes.
Okay, so okay, I know you understand it. It's hard to articulate it sometimes, but what I really want everyone to consider writing. So you're very close. This is that in qualitative research, in quantitative research, while the process is important, as long as you have the measuring instruments, you have the units, you have the variables, and it's consistent between five researchers, it's considered reliable. In qualitative researchers, what changes, because you're not looking always to measure variables, you're still looking for changes, you're still looking for to get a sense of something, is that if multiple qualitative researchers followed the same process and went through the same bit of information or data like interviews or transcripts, would they consistently come up with the same sense, same feeling, same conclusion as the initial researcher? And then that would essentially be a reliable qualitative measure. Okay, so for example, if you were interviewing 5 people from Syria, let's say each student in this class got the opportunity to interview 5 people from war-torn Syria. Okay, same 5 people, maybe they consented hypothetically, or maybe it was just one set of interviews and each of you got to read the transcript. If at the end of reading all the transcripts of the interviews, all 5 researchers working independently came to the conclusion that people are significantly traumatized, they miss their home terribly, most Syrian expatriates would like to return home. Most feel their children have better opportunities here, but this is not their homeland and this is distant from their culture. And finally, most people would like peace and prosperity to return to their country. If these are the themes all 5 researchers can come to after, so that means your measuring instruments have been reliable. Your questions have accurately measured why how Syrian expatriates who came from war-torn Syria feel about their country. So just because all 5 researchers can come to the same conclusion, right? So reliability is basically, no matter who does it, you get to the same conclusion. So in that sense, they're similar. It's just that you're measuring instruments, your variables themselves, and
Differ.
they're all different.
Okay.
Okay. Is validity a concern for qualitative researchers? Should stuff be valid?
Yes.
Yes.
Because you're looking at the accuracy
Yeah.
of the variable and how it fits the concept.
Exactly. What's the point of having stuff that's not our information, research information that's not valid? Then it doesn't do anything. It doesn't answer anything. You can't ask somebody to tell you the length of something and they tell you, well, it's about 2.5 finger lengths long. That it doesn't make any sense. In the old days, I can't remember what century, but the yard used to be a variable measure. We know what the yard is now. Yard is pretty close to a meter. But at one point of time, I can't remember which king of England it was. Basically, a yard measure was the distance between the tip of their nose to their elbow. That was a yard. So
can I ask, what if the limbs? What if one person's 5 feet 1 and the other is 6 feet 2?
Well, exactly. So the yard would be different, right?
Okay.
So the yard would be totally different. Right, so the yard would change the moment one king was eliminated and the next king came. Okay, now the yard is different, right? So it was a problem in the Middle Ages. It's not a relevant issue anymore. In several portions of India, tribal areas, they don't use measuring scales, and they still use a measure which is from the wrist to the elbow to measure the length of fabric. They don't use it in cities and towns and stuff, but there are rural hamlets which are isolated from mainstream civilization, and they still use the elbow to wrist measurement as a unit of length. So it'll differ. If you got a tall merchant, you'd get more for your money. And if you got a short merchant, you'd get less for your money. Okay? Well, what are the 6 steps for creating research questions in qualitative research? We already know that. We just discussed that shortly. In what aspects is asking a question different for qualitative versus quantitative research? So there are many differences, right? First of all, you're not trying to get a numerical measure
With qualitative.
in qualitative, right? Secondly, in qualitative, often, if you don't have transcripts, you're often asking a question instead of making a measurement. And the response to the question may give you a variable to measure. Now, in quantitative, you're not really asking a question. If your doctor wants to measure your weight, they're not going to ask you, well, what do you think about your weight? And you sit and say, well, since Thanksgiving, I've gained 15. But no, they're just going to ask you to step on a scale, right? You're done. So there's the difference. So I think fundamentally that's the difference. You're trying to get a change in variability or variables by asking the question, whereas it tends to be more numerical and quantitative, and you actually just do the measurement. Okay. Question 16. Where are some places that you can find information on unemployment rate and average income against Canadians?
That's
Everybody.
Canada?
Yes. That was a gimme.
You can put that on the test.
Yes, I'll go ahead and do that after giving you already all the questions and all the answers. Come on. Oh, all good. All right. Okay, what else do we have for today? Because we only have reading week between now.
Professor,
Yeah.
are you accessible in reading week?
Oh yeah. I am.
Okay.
Yeah, just send me an email. We're not on vacation. We're still working. So 100%.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank
If you
you.
have any questions, send me an email. The other thing I just wanted to remind everybody regarding the midterm. I'm just going to go. Does anybody remember what date? March 9th. Okay.
Yes.
So you still have more than a week after. Well, you have about 2 weeks after reading week to get prepared. You have two choices for taking the midterm exam. You can, well, it doesn't really matter because the way the midterm is going to be set up, I'm going to use an online tool called Socrative. I'm just going to share that screen with you. You don't have to worry. You don't need to know how to use it because I'll send you a link. All you have to do is click. And just to familiarize everybody, this is how it looks like. So when you go into Socrative, of course I will, you can go in as a student and hypothetically, now if I turn this on, I'm just going to pretend I'm a student because I did the student. I'll send you by email my virtual test room number and let me see. Anyway, it's I don't remember my details. I'm going to have to do that. That's my project during reading week to remind myself what that is. The benefit of that is every one of you, like for the midterm, even if you're planning to come to class, bring your laptop or your smartphone or both. It doesn't matter. So don't show up to class without that because you will need that for your midterm. You're going to be answering everything on your computer. Unfortunately, I don't think there's a do-over. So once you've answered a question, you can't go back and erase stuff to change it.
Okay.
So, oh, actually, you can. Sorry, never mind. My bad. You can. You can. You are able to do do-overs. Yeah, so it's going to be 40% of your grade. So there will be 40 questions, 40 multiple choice questions. And if you need extra time, well, if you don't have a class, I don't really care. So
Okay.
you can take as much time as you want. Okay.
Okay.
And anything else, any other thing you need, just send me a quick email saying I need A, B, and C. But if you're taking the midterm remotely, when you log in to Zoom, you will have to turn your video on because I need to be able to supervise you while you're taking the exam. Okay.
Okay. I've inquired in my
Yeah.
public library, and they do have rooms, like little meeting rooms.
Yeah.
So close to the time, I'll make reservations for one of them. So it's just nice and quiet, private.
Yeah, I mean, you can turn the sound off because you're not going to be talking while taking a midterm. So if you're concerned about noise, but you don't want to leave, now for Aretha, she's made arrangements but for those of you who think that, oh, well, my house is going to be noisy, don't worry about it. As long as you mute yourself. I mean, I just need to be able to have the visual of you taking the test, right? So
Okay.
just from a fairness perspective, it is a supervised test. So
Okay.
that's why. Okay. Any other questions regarding the midterm, regarding the chapters we've covered so far? Regarding the weather? No, I don't know about the weather. Anyway, it's cold and colder here in Sudbury. All right, early finish today. I don't know if you have complaints, we can go on, we can start the next stuff, but if you are happy, then we will meet again on, well, after reading week. So enjoy your reading week.
Yeah, okay. Have a lovely Valentine, Professor. That's tomorrow.
Well, thank you very much. Yes, thank you for the reminder. My wife will not appreciate that I forgot, but
Okay.
all right.
Right. By the time we get to exam, we would have read up to chapter 9, right?
Correct.
Okay.
So
Here's the
everything that is completed is fair game.
Okay.
Okay. And the final exam is comprehensive, which means it does involve chapter 1 through 9. 1 through
Ooh.
13. Not 1 through 9. 1 through 13. I think there are 13 chapters that involves all of them.
Okay.
Okay.
How many, you wouldn't know yet about how many questions or what the layout maybe?
For the final?
Yes.
Final, I will be doing short answer questions, no MCQs. We'll do short answer questions. And the final exam will not just use the question banks, it will also use the questions at the back of the chapter. So yes, you have your question banks, and I've already given you the answers to the questions on the question bank. And that's great, but you're also going to have to do a little bit of work to find out the answers at the back of the chapters, which shouldn't be a big deal if you already know your chapters and you've done the midterm. So you should be in good shape, I think.
Okay. And exam is the 2nd of April.
I have no idea. Do you have the date already?
On the printout from the overview, applied research.
That's changed. Just look at the latest printout, because the exam is going to be scheduled by the registrar. The date is not
Okay.
set.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay.
No problem. And let me check, because you brought this up, because if that's the case, I need to fix that. Yes, it says 2nd of April. No, it's not the 2nd of April, okay? So
Okay.
heads up, everybody. The final exam is not the 2nd of April. The registrar's office will send notice telling you when it is. It's going to be after that.
All right.
Those of you who have booked expensive vacations, I'm truly sorry.
Stick around a bit longer, eh?
Yes.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, Professor, you have yourself a wonderful break. Well,
Yeah,
weekend.
folks too, you all too. Thanks, Aretha.
You're welcome. Bye.
Bye.
We'll be communicating in the break.
Yes, absolutely. Feel free.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.